Hey there, welcome to First Look. Thanks for being here this time. So we're post picnic, and we're headed towards the fall. And by the time you hear me preach again, it will be the fall, because this coming week I am off. I'll be on vacation, so you get a break. And the person you'll be hearing from is Elizabeth Nicodemus, who preached for us last year. And she is a seminary graduate and someone who comes to us from Highland. And so, as we look at a gospel passage that I think you've certainly heard me preach before, I know that I've preached before, it'll be good to hear another voice and someone who can look at that from another perspective. So, today is really about just me kind of adding some thoughts to kind of get your head prepared for the passage and start thinking about it, knowing that it won't be me who will be taking this any further than that. So we're very happy to have Elizabeth there, and her bio information I think will be in the Piper, and so anyway, I've known her for a while, and I'm just happy that she was able to come back and preach with us. So that's wonderful. So just a real recap on the picnic. It went really smoothly, really nice. The lodge is great, and maybe we get a chance to do that again. I never know how that works from a scheduling standpoint, but it's just about availability. So that worked out really nicely, and the music was great, and I'm glad that everyone was able to attend in such good weather. And we had wonderful food as normal, and so thank you for that too. And thanks for those who participated in the tie-dyeing stuff. You never know how things like that is going to work. That was just the activity that I chose because I thought, maybe it would be one of those things that, a lot of people would enjoy, regardless of, whether you're young or young at heart. And it ended up being pretty great. So thank you to the folks who kind of helped me out to make sure that was successful. And I'm just glad that it worked out. I'm pouring coffee. You're having coffee with me here this morning. So we're kind of marching forward into, we've been in Mark now for a couple weeks, not in a series per se, but just kind of marching through the gospel as it's written. And this is another passage that, again, well, but it wouldn't be the first thing that came to mind if you were talking about your faith. It's not one of those things. So I'm always interested. I'm always fascinated by texts that you know well. Not only the opportunity to preach them again or talk about them again, but then also, what will it sound like, coming from another perspective? In our context, in a Northmont context, in 2024, what do we have to say about it, and how does it affect who we are and how we think now? So that's a really wonderful thing. So let me read this for us, and then we'll just kind of see where it takes us, kind of work our way through it. I haven't read through it again yet. I know just by the subtitles what it's about, but I haven't read the details of it here since the last time I did it. So we'll discover it together. All right, so this is Mark chapter 9, 30 through 37. The first section is about resurrection. They went on from there and passed through Galilee. So now okay. He did not want anyone to know it. I think that he was the Messiah. For he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, "The Son of Man is to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him, and 3 days after being killed, he will rise again." But they did not understand what he was saying, and were afraid to ask him. And then it goes on, then they came to Capernaum, which is a town in Galilee. Capernaum was like the smaller scale, right? Galilee is a smaller place, but Capernaum was like the marketplace. That's where you'd stop if you were a traveler, the cross section of Galilee. If you were coming from Jerusalem or coming from somewhere else and you were going elsewhere, Capernaum is where you'd stop. right? So it's that kind of epicenter of ideas in that context. So then they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he said to them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they were silent, for on the way they had argued which one, for on the way they had argued that, I'm tongue-tied today, I am sorry, argued with one another who was the greatest. And he sat down and called 12 and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all the servants and servant of all." Then he took a little child and put it among them, and taking the child into his arms, said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." Okay. I botched reading that. I apologize, but sometimes this is what happens to your eyes. All right, so a little bit of context, just to kind of make sure that we know where we are in the book. I like to usually look right before, just to kind of see where we are. So if you look at the rest of chapter 9, which is where we are, this is a kind of a mystical chapter, I guess you could call it. I guess that's a good way of putting it. So the first part of Mark chapter 9 talks about the transfiguration. So you have heard me talk a lot about the transfiguration, so I thought you probably, you need a little bit of a jubilee on that, just a little bit of a rest on transfiguration. So that's the first part. So we're pretty familiar with the transfiguration. And then as it moves forward, it starts to compare Jesus and Elijah, right? So it's like taking that transfiguration experience and then kind of talking about like what end times, resurrection, the end of things would look like, right? That kind of Messiah, the completion of all things. That's what the coming of Elijah would sort of point to. Okay. And then it pivots from there into Jesus healing a boy who has a spirit, right? So, all of that kind of speaks to I use the word supernatural, and I think that makes you think of like a superhero or aliens or something like that. But I just mean more than natural, above or pertaining to that which is greater than what nature provides, right? So all of this sort of speaks to the transcendent, the mystical, and an idea of Jesus that goes beyond just what is bound earthly. And so that's all of what this chapter looks like. And then after all of that, Jesus talks about resurrection, his own resurrection. The Son of Man is to be betrayed, and they didn't know what to do with that. So it's interesting that you have all of that lead up, right? All of that kind of otherworldly, outside of our experience, introduction, I guess you could say, to this passage here in chapter 9, where they're talking about the greatest. And this passage, the juxtaposition of those two things, I think is what is really fascinating. So you have all of that, and then you have a discussion of the disciples being kind of ashamed of themselves, or feeling a little sheepish, I guess you could say, about the fact that they were discussing, who among us is going to be, who's going to be the top dogs here, right? Who's going to get selected to be at the top of the pecking order when it comes to Jesus and what Jesus is creating. And then, of course, Jesus right away has to say, the first shall be last. And then doubles down on that by saying you have to be like this little child. And if you're going from a discussion of the mystical and the otherworldly and the supernatural and the transcendent, and then this hard pivot into the practicalities of hierarchy, and then ending with, you can't get any from high to low without, Jesus being, having his face illumined and doing all that, and then, miracles and Messiah and that, and then like a discussion about a very practical kind of hierarchy, and then now you're a child. Like the arc of that is really dramatic. And I think there's a lot that we can draw from that about who Jesus is, but also about who we are. So the first thing I think I would mention is that Jesus is fighting, might be the wrong word. There's a struggle back and forth all the time. Not only with the way that we see Jesus, but with, I think, the way that Jesus is trying to allow people to see him in a very timely way. The fact that he is not only one who's going to change the world and who's going to be there for the people and who's going to lift the people up in this kingdom of God here on earth, but who's also, God in the flesh, right? And there's a clear timeliness to that. That Jesus must understand if he says it too early, if he says it too late, if he doesn't say it to the right people, if he says it to too many people, that something about that plan doesn't go the way it's supposed to go, right? There's something he's always kind of protecting. So he tells people and then draws it back, and then he exposes it, and then and so there's that idea behind his messiahship. But then from there, you also have Jesus needing to be someone who is incarnate and on the ground and doing things that the people in front of him need in a very justice-oriented, in a very holistic, reconciling, peacemaking kind of way. While at the same time showing his disciples and showing others power and authority, right? So Jesus is always engaged in this kind of balance. And I think it's important, it would have been important for the disciples, and certainly it's for us, that to try to, when we lift Jesus up into these high places, not that we shouldn't, but when that happens, when we think about him in these grandiose kind of ways, Easter kind of ways, right? Which is obviously a good thing to do. I'm not disparaging it. When we lift Jesus up in these transcending kind of ways, he's like, there's certain times a year that we do that. Right? We do that at Easter, like I mentioned, or Lent. We do that kind of at Christmas, but kind of not. We do that in times that we talk about the I'm just blanking on it right now. Oh, the last week of the liturgical year, which happens usually in late November, which is Christ the King Sunday, or the Reign of Christ Sunday, where we talk about the Alpha and Omega of who Jesus is, right? The end times, returning again in glory kind of Jesus. And so we can get there with who Jesus is, but then also shouldn't forget or downplay or push aside the Jesus that really, that feet on the ground Jesus. And, taking it from, my face is glowing like the sun, kind of vision that you get with him in that beginning of the chapter, as you look at his transfiguration, and you move from the transfiguration to the healing, and then healing to these practical kind of conversations. You get that emphasis pretty clearly, and that's an important element to understanding how we follow Jesus. That we of course celebrate who he is completely as the Son of Man, who he is completely as God incarnate, but then we also can't forget those really practical elements of what it means to follow Jesus. And I think, for the disciples, let's start with the disciples and then we'll move to us. For the disciples specifically, that's, ridiculously important. Because even if you're looking at the idea that they would be discussing who's the greatest among us, that might be a worldly way of understanding it, but it's also understanding that Jesus is going to change the world in every socio-political, economic, global, whatever they can imagine. That's what they're going to do, reshaping the world from the ground up. But to take that one step further and to say to follow me means to be like a child, there was very little else he could have said that would have been as humbling. Because, pride and ego and, they're literally talking about being who's the most alpha here. And so in that alpha discussion, Jesus is like, yeah, whatever you think the opposite of an alpha is. And, that's an important discussion to have for the disciples. And, I was thinking about, someone was mentioning the diversity within the disciples. And I forget that. And I think I'll probably preach on that here sometime later. But that you have people who, like the example that someone was giving me about the diversity within the disciples was, you had Matthew, who was a tax collector on one end, and then one of the, I think it's James. I hope it's James. I hope I didn't goof that up. Who was a zealot. And so, even if I have that wrong, one of them was a zealot. I believe it was James. There was a James who was a zealot. So you have Matthew, who cozied up to the empire on one end of the spectrum, to the zealot, who's on the completely different end of the spectrum, right? Couldn't be running farther away from the empire. And those two people, along with, his brother and Peter, and so a diversity of economic status, and Judas, you couldn't have a broader cross-section of the world as they knew it than the people who were there. And there must have been a lot of competing ideas about where they were going, what this would mean. And if you're different ends of the socioeconomic political spectrum, like those two people were, you probably have very different visions of that. Which one of us is going to come on top? Who among us is going to be considered higher or lower? Makes sense that would be a discussion they'd be having. And Jesus trying to say, hey, listen, you're not seeing this the right way. You need to move into another place, was important. And that is obviously pretty important for us too. I think because sometimes we can forget that our faith isn't just this sort of intellectual exercise, but has real life consequences because people of faith are a huge part of society. You know, people of faith might look differently. Religious practice might look differently than it did 20 years ago or 50 years ago. And I understand all that, and I know all the stats and whatever. But people of faith are still a huge part of the fabric of this country, and the way that we express that faith, the way that we live that out, is still very visible. And I think one of the things that we forget often is our call to kind of live out those very practical things that Jesus, we see Jesus act out all the time, right? That's the him on the ground stuff. Our job day to day isn't usually to try to convince people of the grand, transcendent concept of who God is, right? That takes time to kind of get your mind around, and you need to have a relationship with Jesus and with people to kind of understand that part. But the part that people can understand is, are you living, speaking, is your rhetoric one that speaks to how we care for the least of these, how we care for the poor, how we care for those who are sick, how we care, like, those are the practical things that people can really get their mind around, right? That even a child can see. A child knows someone who seems, like arrogant, or seems like a bully, or seems uncaring about other people around them, or only wants to hear themselves talk, or whatever. Like, a child can tell from a mile away just by looking at somebody if they're like that, because they study adults and they know what adults are like, and they also can understand kindness and empathy and the ability to learn and be curious and be happy and joyous and share and things. Like, they can see that. And I think that on some level, what you see here in this passage is Jesus trying to remind the people, yes, all of these things are true, but you got to get down to this also. Like, we can't forget these things, or we're never going to be able to make the connection between people's lives as they are and this grander aspect of what it means for me to be the Messiah. And I think more often than not, if I'm really thinking about the analogy of, having faith like a child, or, exhibiting that as a child, the children in my life are examples of, I think, not only a kind of innocence, but also a kind of curiosity. And I think when we lose that curiosity, there's that show, Ted Lasso, that talks about the difference between judgment and curiosity. You can be judgmental, or you can be curious about people. And I think that children exhibit curiosity until we show them enough for them to start being judgmental. And at some point along the line, they become more like adults, i.e. they become more judgmental and less curious. And I think that part of our job, not only as teachers and parents or grandparents or church family people, or as a society, is to promote curiosity. I've never known anyone who was curious who I had disdain for. Think about what I'm saying for a second. I've never actually thought about that, at least not in that way. Any person that you know that genuinely has genuine curiosity, I don't understand. Like, talk to me about what this is like for you. When someone comes about something with genuine curiosity, I don't care what political, ethnic, religious, economic, anything. They come. Name a curious person who's genuinely curious that you really, really don't care for. Maybe they frustrate you from time to time because you wish they'd kind of put two and two together, I guess at the worst. But I can't think of anyone who is curious that I have disdain for. There's not too many people I have disdain for, but that kind of searching is about all you could ask for from anybody. Is it nice that when they make decisions, is it nice when they start to kind of put two and two together? Yeah, but and you want people to make decisions with empathy and caring. But I don't know that many people I can think of who are curious that I have disdain for. And I think that's partially what I think Jesus wants from his disciples and from us is, yeah, you're going to learn a lot about me, and you're going to start to have to proclaim who that is. But you're never going to fully understand it. You're never going to be on top of it, right? You're never going to have all the keys to this. At some point, you still have to try to learn and grow and understand and be humble about who I am and about your own faith. And I think that's ultimately where this leads us. But then again, our friend Ms. Nicodemus may take us in a very different direction, which is also incredible. And that's why we do this. You need to hear many more voices than mine, and I'm glad that you get a chance to do it this week. So I look forward to seeing how it goes. I look forward to seeing where she takes it. I'm glad that that's happening this week. I will be out of town, but I will be back for next week. Full disclosure, when you watch this, the next one I do, I'll be recording today, so I'll be in the same shirt. So I'm going to record these back to back for this week and next. So I just wanted to let you know that's true. Anyway, have a wonderful week. Thanks for being you. I hope to see you at Amos this week on Wednesday at 6:00. Until then, I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you next time for another First Look. So take care.